Chapter 5, Adam and Eve. 1. Adam as the arcane substance. Like the king and queen, our first parents are among those figures through whom the alchemists expressed the symbolism of opposites. Adam is mentioned far more frequently than Eve, and for this reason we shall have to concern ourselves first and principally with him. He will give us plenty to get on with, as he figures in a great variety of significations, which enter the world of alchemical ideas from the most heterogeneous sources. Rulin defines Adam as a synonym for the aqua permanens, in contradistinction to Eve, who signifies earth. Water is the prime arcane substance, and is therefore the agent of transformation as well as the substance to be transformed. As water is synonymous with Mercurius, we can understand the remark of John Dee that other Mercurius, who appears in the course of the work, is the Mercurius of the philosophers, that most renowned microcosm and Adam. Adam is mentioned as the arcane substance in Rosinus. His correlates are lead and azok, both, like Adam, of hermaphroditic nature. Similarly, Dorn says that the lapis was called Adam, who bore his invisible Eve hidden in his body. This archaic idea occasionally turns up in the products of the insane today. The dual nature of Adam is suggested in the Gloria Mundi. When Almighty God had created Adam and set him in paradise, he showed him two things in the future, saying, "Behold, Adam, here are two things, one fixed and constant, the other fugitive." As the transformative substance, therefore, Adam is also the king who is renewed in the bath. Basilius Valentinus says in his poem, "Adam sat in the bath which the old dragon had prepared and in which Venus found her companion." It was a bold stroke, even for a Baroque imagination, to bring together Adam and Venus. In the poem, Venus is the fountain that flows from the stone and submerges her father, absorbing his body and life into herself. She is thus a parallel figure to Bea, who dissolved Gabricus into atoms in her body. In the same section, in which Rulin mentions Adam as a synonym for water, he states that he was also called the tall man. Rulin was a Paracelsist, so this expression may well coincide with the great man of Paracelsus, the Adec, whom Rulin defines as our inner and invisible man. Accordingly, the arcane substance would appear to be the inner man or primordial man, known as Adam Kadmon in the Kabbalah. In the poem of Valentinus, this inner man is swamped by the goddess of love, an unmistakable psychologum for a definite and typical psychic state, which is also symbolized very aptly by the Gnostic love affair between Nous and Physis. In both cases, the higher spiritual man is the more comprehensive, supraordinate totality which we know as the self. The bath, submersion, baptism, and drowning are synonymous, and all are alchemical symbols for the unconscious state of the self, its embodiments, as it were, or more precisely, for the unconscious process by which the self is reborn, and enters into a state in which it can be experienced. This state is then described as the filius regius. The old dragon who prepared the bath, a primeval creature dwelling in the caverns of the earth, is, psychologically, a personification of the instinctual psyche, generally symbolized by reptiles. It is as though the alchemists were trying to express the fact that the unconscious itself initiates the process of renewal. Adam's bath is also mentioned in a Latin manuscript in my possession, where an unspecified being or creature addresses Adam thus: "Here, Adam, I will speak with you. You must go with me into the bath. You know in what manner we are influenced the one by the other, and how you must pass through me. Thus I step up to you with my sharpened arrows, aiming them at your heart." Here again, Adam is the transformative substance, the old Adam, who is to renew himself. The arrows recall the tellum passionis of Mercurius and the shafts of Luna, which the alchemists, via the mysticism of Hugh of St. Victor and others, referred to that well-known passage in the Song of Songs, "Thou hast wounded my heart," as we have seen earlier. The speaker in the manuscript must be feminine, as immediately before there is a reference to the cohabitation of man and woman. Both texts point to a hieroskamos which presupposes a kind of consanguineous relationship between sponsus and sponsa. The relationship between Adam and Eve is as close as it is difficult to define. According to an old tradition, Adam was androgynous before the creation of Eve. Eve, therefore, was more himself than if she had been his sister. Adam's highly unbiblical marriage is emphasized as a hieroskimos by the fact that God himself was present at the ceremony as best man, paranymphos. Traces of Kabbalistic tradition are frequently noticeable in the alchemical treatises from the 16th century on. Both our texts are fairly late and so fall well within this tradition. We must now turn to the question of why it was that Adam should have been selected as a symbol for the prima materia, or transformative substance. This was probably due, in the first place, to the fact that he was made out of clay, the ubiquitous materia vilis that was axiomatically regarded as the prima materia, and for that very reason was so tantalizingly difficult to find, although it was before all eyes. It was a piece of the original chaos, of the massa confusa, not yet differentiated, but capable of differentiation, something, therefore, like shapeless embryonic tissue. Everything could be made out of it. For us, the essential feature of the prima materia is that it was defined as the massa confusa and chaos, referring to the original state of hostility between the elements, the disorder which the artifacts gradually reduced to order by his operations. Corresponding to the four elements, there were four stages of the process, tetrameria, marked by four colors, by means of which the originally chaotic arcane substance finally attained to unity, to the one, the lapis, which at the same time was an homunculus. In this way, the philosopher repeated God's work of creation described in Genesis 1. No wonder, therefore, that he called his prima materia Adam, and asserted that it, like him, consisted or was made out of the four elements. For out of the four elements were created our father Adam and his children, says the Turba. And Gebir ibn Hayyan Jabir says in his Book of Balances, the Pentateuch says, regarding the creation of the first being, that his body was composed of four things, which thereafter were transmitted by heredity: the warm, the cold, the moist, and the dry. He was in fact composed of earth and water, a body and a soul. Dryness came to him from the earth, moisture from the water, heat from the spirit, and cold from the soul. The later literature often mentions Adam as a compositio elementorum. Because he was composed out of the four cosmic principles, he was called the microcosm. The Tractatus Macraris says, even so is man called the lesser world, mundus minor, because in him is the figure of the heavens, of the earth, of the sun and moon, a visible figure upon earth, and at the same time, invisible, wherefore he is named the lesser world. Therefore the old philosophers said of him, when the water fell upon the earth, Adam was created, who is the lesser world. Similar views of Adam are found elsewhere. Thus the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says that God collected the dust from which Adam was made from the four corners of the earth. Rabbi Meir, second cent, states that Adam was made from dust from all over the world. In Mohammedan tradition, Tabari, Masudi, and others say that when the earth refused to provide the material for Adam's creation, the angel of death came along with three kinds of earth: black, white, and red. The Syrian Book of the Cave of Treasures relates, and they saw God take a grain of dust from the whole earth, and a drop of water from the whole sea, and a breath of wind from the upper air, and a little warmth from the nature of fire. And the angels saw how these four weak elements, the dry, the moist, the cold, and the warm, were laid in the hollow of his hand. And then God made Adam. The poet Jalaluddin Rumi says that the earth from which Adam was made had 7 colors. A collection of English riddles from the 15th century asks the following questions concerning Adam's creation. Questions Bitwen the Maester of Oxenford and his scholar. Whereof was Adam made? Of 8 things, the first of earth, the second of fire, the third of wind, the third of cloudies, the feeth of air, where thorough he speaketh and thinketh, the fourth of dew, whereby he sweeteth, the fourth of flowers, whereof Adam hath his ayin, the vaith is salte, whereof Adam hath salt terrace. This material clearly shows the tratic and ogdotic nature of Adam, and there is also that characteristic uncertainty as to 3 and 7, 4 elements, 4 colors, 4 qualities, 4 humors, and 3 and 7 colors. Dorn calls the ternarius, the number 3, peculiar to Adam, ademo proprius. And because the ternarius was the offspring of the unarius, the number 1, the devil, whose nature is binary, could do nothing against him, but had to make his attack upon Eve, who was divided from her husband as a natural binarius from the unity of his ternarius. Vigenerus, commenting on Icor 1547, writes, For the elements are circular in their arrangement, as Hermes makes clear, each being surrounded by two others with which it agrees in one of those qualities peculiar to itself. As, for instance, earth is between fire and water, partaking in the dryness of fire and the coldness of water. And so with the rest. Man, therefore, who is an image of the great world, and is called the microcosm or little world, as the little world, made after the similitude of its archetype and compounded of the four elements, is called the great man, has also his heaven and his earth. For the soul and the understanding are his heaven, his body and senses his earth. Therefore, to know the heaven and earth of man is the same as to have a full and complete knowledge of the whole world and of the things of nature. The circular arrangement of the elements in the world and in man is symbolized by the mandala and its quaternary structure. Adam would then be a quaternarius, as he was composed of red, black, white, and green dust from the four corners of the earth, and his stature reached from one end of the world to the other. According to one Targum, God took the dust not only from the four quarters but also from the sacred spot, the center of the world. The four quarters reappear in the Greek letters of Adam's name: Anatole, sunrise, east; Desis, sunset, west; Arctos, Great Bear, north; Mesembria, noon, south. The Book of the Cave of Treasures states that Adam stood on the spot where the cross was later erected, and that this spot was the center of the earth. Adam, too, was buried at the center of the earth, on Golgotha. He died on a Friday, at the same hour as the Redeemer. Eve bore two pairs of twins, Cain and Labuda, Abel and Kelamoth, who later married each other, marriage quaternio. Adam's grave is the Cave of Treasures. All his descendants must pay their respects to his body and not depart from it. When the flood was approaching, Noah took Adam's body with him into the ark. The ark flew over the flood on the wings of the wind from east to west and from north to south, thus describing a cross upon the waters. At the midpoint where Adam was buried, the four corners come together, for when God created the earth, his power ran along in front of it, and the earth ran after his power from four sides like winds and gentle breezes, and there his power stopped and came to rest. And there will be accomplished the redemption for Adam and all his children. Over the grave where the cross would stand there grew a tree, and there too was the altar of Melchizedek. When Shem laid the body on the ground, the four sides moved away from one another. The earth opened in the form of a cross, and Shem and Melchizedek laid the body inside. And as soon as they had done this, the four sides moved together again and covered the body of our father Adam, and the doors of the earth were closed. And the same spot was named the place of the skull, because the head of all men was laid there, and Golgotha, because it was round, and Gabbatha, because all the nations were gathered in it. There the power of God will appear, for the four corners of the world have there become one, say the Ethiopic Clementines. God said to Adam, I shall make thee God, but not now, only after the passing of a great number of years. The apocryphal Life of Adam and Eve says that the east and north of paradise were given to Adam, but the west and south to Eve. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer relates that Adam was buried in the double cave Machpelah, and that Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah were buried there too. Therefore the cave was named Kiriath Arba, the city of four, because four husbands and wives were buried there. I do not want to pile up proofs of Adam's quaternary nature, but only to give it due emphasis. Psychologically, the four are the four orienting functions of consciousness, two of them perceptive, irrational, and two discriminative, rational. We could say that all mythological figures who are marked by a quaternity have ultimately to do with the structure of consciousness. We can therefore understand why Isaac Luria attributed every psychic quality to Adam. He is the psyche par excellence. The material I have presented is so suggestive that no detailed commentary is needed. Adam stands not only for the psyche, but for its totality. He is a symbol of the self, and hence a visualization of the irrepresentable Godhead. Even if all the texts here cited were not available to the alchemists, a knowledge of the Zosimos treatises or of certain Kabbalistic traditions would have been sufficient to make quite clear to them what was meant when the arcane substance was called Adam. I need hardly point out how important these historical statements are from the psychological point of view. They give us valuable indications of the way in which the corresponding dream symbols should be evaluated. We do not devalue statements that originally were intended to be metaphysical when we demonstrate their psychic nature. On the contrary, we confirm their factual character. But by treating them as psychic phenomena, we remove them from the inaccessible realm of metaphysics, about which nothing verifiable can be said, and this disposes of the impossible question as to whether they are true or not. We take our stand simply and solely on the facts, recognizing that the archetypal structure of the unconscious will produce, over and over again, and irrespective of tradition, those figures which reappear in the history of all epochs and all peoples, and will endow them with the same significance and numinosity that have been theirs from the beginning. 2. The statue. An old tradition says that Adam was created a lifeless statue. It is worthy of remark that the statue plays a mysterious role in ancient alchemy. One of the earliest Greek treatises, the Book of Komarios, says, "After the body had been hidden in the darkness, the spirit found it full of light, and the soul united with the body, since the body had become divine through its relation to the soul, and it dwelt in the soul. For the body clothed itself in the light of divinity, and the darkness departed from it, and all were united in love, body, soul, and spirit, and all became one. In this the mystery is hidden. But the mystery was fulfilled in their coming together, and the house was sealed, and the statue was erected, filled with light and divinity." Here the statue evidently denotes the end product of the process, the lapis philosophorum, or its equivalent. The statue has a somewhat different significance in the treatise of Senior, who speaks of the water that is extracted from the hearts of statues. Senior is identical with the Arabian alchemist Ibn Umayl al-Tamimi. He is reported to have opened tombs and sarcophagi in Egypt and to have removed the mummies. Mummies were supposed to possess medicinal virtues, and for this reason bits of corpses had long been mentioned in European pharmacy under the name of mumia. It is possible that mumia was also used for alchemical purposes. It is mentioned in Kunrath as synonymous with the prima materia. In Paracelsus, who may have been Kunrath's source for this, mumia balsamida has something to do with the elixir, and is even called the physical life principle itself. Senior statues may well have been Egyptian sarcophagi, which as we know were portrait statues. In the same treatise there is a description of a statue of Hermes Trismegistus in an underground chapel. Senior says, "I shall now make known to you what that wise man who made the statue has hidden in that house. In it he has described that whole science, as it were, in the figure, and taught his wisdom in the stone, and revealed it to the discerning." Michael Meyer comments, "That is the statue from whose heart the water is extracted." He also mentions that a stone statue which pronounced oracles was dedicated to Hermes in Achaia Ferris. In Raymond Lully, Ramon Lull, there is an oil that is extracted from the heart of statues, and moreover, by the washing of water and the drying of fire. This is an extremely paradoxical operation in which the oil evidently serves as a mediating and uniting agent. There is an allusion to the statues in Thomas Norton's Ordinal of Alchemy, but holy alchemy of right is to be loved, which treateth of a precious medicine, such as truly maketh gold and silver fine, whereof example for testimony is in a city of Catalony. Which Raymond Lully, knight, men do suppose, made in 7 images the truth to disclose. 3 were good silver, in shape like ladies bright, every each of 4 were gold, and like a knight. In borders of their clothing letters did appear, signifying in sentence as it sheweth here. The 7 refer to the gods of the planets, or the 7 metals. The correlation of the 3, Venus, Moon, Earth, with silver, Luna, and of the 4 with gold, Sol, is remarkable in that 3 is usually considered a masculine and 4 a feminine number. As Lully was undoubtedly acquainted with Senior, this legend seems like a concretization of Senior's saying. The idea of a precious substance hidden in the statue is an old tradition and is particularly true of the statues of Hermes or Mercurius. Pseudo-Dionysius says that the pagans made statues of Mercurius and hid in them a simulacrum of the god. In this way they worshipped not the unseemly Herm, but the image hidden inside. Plato is referring to these statues when he makes Alcibiades say that Socrates bears a strong resemblance to those figures of Silenus in statuaries' shops, represented holding pipes or flutes. They are hollow inside, and when they are taken apart, you see that they contain little figures of gods. It must have appealed very much to the imagination of the alchemists that there were statues of Mercurius with the real god hidden inside. Mercurius was their favorite name for that being who changed himself during the work from the prima materia into the perfected lapis philosophorum. The figure of Adam readily lent itself as a biblical synonym for the alchemical Mercurius, first because he too was androgynous, and second because of his dual aspect as the first and second Adam. The second Adam is Christ, whose mystical androgyny is established in ecclesiastical tradition. Shall come back to this aspect of Adam later. According to the tradition of the Mandeans, Adam was created by the seven in the form of a lifeless bodily statue, which could not stand erect. This characteristic expression, bodily statue, frequently recurs in their literature and recalls the Chaldean myth handed down by the Nassenes, that man's body was created by the demons and was called a statue. Tehil, the world creator, tried to throw the soul into the statue, but Manda Dahai, the Redeemer, took the soul in his arms and completed the work without Tehil. In this connection, we may note that there is a description of the statue of Adam in Kabbalistic literature. As Adam has always been associated with the idea of the second Adam in the minds of Christian writers, it is readily understandable that this idea should reappear among the alchemists. Thus Melius says, "There now remains the second part of the philosophical practice, by far the more difficult, by much the more sublime." In this we read that all the sinews of talent, all the mental efforts of many philosophers have wearied themselves, for it is more difficult to make a man live again than to slay him. Here is God's work besought, for it is a great mystery to create souls and to mold the lifeless body into a living statue. This living statue refers to the end result of the work, and the work, as we have seen, was on the one hand a repetition of the creation of the world, and on the other a process of redemption, for which reason the lapis was paraphrased as the risen Christ. The texts sometimes strike a chiliastic note with their references to a golden age when men will live forever without poverty and sickness. Now it is remarkable that the statue is mentioned in connection with the eschatological ideas of the Manichaeans, as reported by Hegemonius. The world will be consumed with fire, and the souls of sinners chained for all eternity, and then shall these things be when the statue shall come. I would not venture to say whether the Manichaeans influenced the alchemists or not, but it is worth noting that in both cases the statue is connected with the end state. The tradition reported by Hegemonius has been confirmed by the recently discovered original work of Mani, the Kephaliah. This says, "At that time, the Father of greatness made the messenger and Jesus the radiant and the virgin of light and the pillar of glory and the gods. The fourth time, when they shall weep, is the time when the statue shall raise itself on the last day. At that same hour, when the last statue shall rise, they shall weep. The first rock is the pillar of glory, the perfect man, who has been summoned by the glorious messenger. He bore the whole world and became the first of all bearers. The intellectual element gathered itself into the pillar of glory, and the pillar of glory into the first man. The garments, which are named the great garments, are the 5 intellectual elements which have made perfect the body of the pillar of glory, the perfect man. It is clear from these extracts that the statue or pillar is either the perfect primordial man, or at least his body, both at the beginning of creation and at the end of time. The statue has yet another meaning in alchemy which is worth mentioning. In his treatise De Igniet Sol, Vigenerus calls the sun the eye and heart of the sensible world and the image of the invisible God, adding that St. Dionysius called it the clear and manifest statue of God. This statement probably refers to Dionysius's De Divinis Nominibus, for the sun is the visible image of divine goodness. Vigenerus translated not by imago, but by statua, which does not agree with the Latin text of the collected edition brought out by Marsilio Ficino in 1502-3, to which he may have had access. It is not easy to see why he rendered by statua, unless perhaps he wished to avoid repeating the word imago from the end of the preceding sentence. But it may also be that the word cor recalled to his mind Senior's phrase from the hearts of statues, as might easily happen with so learned an alchemist. There is, however, another source to be considered. It is evident from this same treatise that Vigenerus was acquainted with the Zohar. There the High Sarah on Genesis 28:22 says that Malkuth is called the statue when she is united with Tifereth. Genesis 28:22 runs, "And this stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house." The stone is evidently a reminder that here the upper Tifereth has united with the lower Malkuth. Tifereth, the sun, has come together with the Matrona in the hieroskamos. If our conjecture is correct, the statue could therefore be the Kabbalistic equivalent of the lapis philosophorum, which is likewise a union of male and female. In the same section of Vigenerus's treatise, the sun does in fact appear as the bridegroom. As Augustine is quoted a few lines later, it is possible that Vigenerus was thinking of that passage where Augustine says, "Like a bridegroom, Christ went forth from his chamber. He went out with a presage of his nuptials into the field of the world. He ran like a giant exulting on his way, and came to the marriage bed of the cross. And there, in mounting it, he consummated his marriage. And when he perceived the size of the creature, by a loving exchange he gave himself up to the torment in place of his bride. He yielded up also the carbuncle as the jewel of his blood, and he joined the woman to himself forever. I have espoused you to one husband," says the apostle, "that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." 2 Cor 11:2. Since Adam signifies not only the beginning of the work, the prima materia, but also the end, the lapis, and the lapis is the product of the royal marriage, it is possible that Vigenerus's Statua Dei, replacing the more usual Imago Dei, has some connection with the Kabbalistic interpretation of the Stone of Bethel, which in turn marked the union of Tifereth and Malkuth. The statue stands for the inert materiality of Adam, who still needs an animating soul. It is thus a symbol for one of the main preoccupations of alchemy. Number 3. Adam as the first adept. Not always in alchemy is Adam created out of the 4 elements. The Introitus Apertus, for instance, says that the soul of the gold is united with Mercurius in lead, that they may bring forth Adam and his wife Eve. Here, Adam and Eve take the place of king and queen. But in general, Adam, being composed of the 4 elements, either is the prima materia and the arcane substance itself, or he brought it with him from paradise at the beginning of the world as the first adept. Mayer mentions that Adam brought antimony, then regarded as an arcane substance, from paradise. The long line of philosophers begins with him. The Aquarium Sapientum asserts that the secret of the stone was revealed to Adam from above and was subsequently sought after with singular longing by all the holy patriarchs. The Gloria Mundi says, "The Lord endowed Adam with great wisdom and such marvelous insight that he immediately, without the help of any teacher, simply by virtue of his original righteousness, had a perfect knowledge of the 7 liberal arts and of all animals, plants, stones, metals, and minerals. Nay, what is more, he had a perfect understanding of the Holy Trinity and of the coming of Christ in the flesh." This curious opinion is traditional and comes mainly from rabbinic sources. Aquinas, too, thought that Adam, because of his perfection, must have had a knowledge of all natural things. In Arabian tradition, Seth learnt medicine from him. Adam also built the Kaaba, for which purpose the angel Gabriel gave him the ground plan and a precious stone. Later the stone turned black because of the sins of men. The Jewish sources are even more explicit. Adam understood all the arts, he invented writing, and from the angels he learnt husbandry and all the professions, including the art of the smith. A treatise from the 11th century lists 30 kinds of fruit which he brought with him from paradise. Maimonides states that Adam wrote a book on trees and plants. Rabbi Eliezer credits Adam with the invention of the leap year. According to him, the tables on which God later inscribed the law came from Adam. From Eliezer, probably, derives the statement of Bernardus Trevisanus that Hermes Trismegistus found 7 stone tables in the Vale of Hebron, left over from antediluvian times. On them was a description of the 7 liberal arts. Adam had put these tables there after his expulsion from paradise. According to Dorn, Adam was the first practitioner and inventor of the arts. He had a knowledge of all things before and after the fall, and he also prophesied the renewal and chastening of the world by the flood. His descendants set up 2 stone tables on which they recorded all the natural arts in hieroglyphic script. Noah found one of these tables at the foot of Mount Ararat, bearing a record of astronomy. This legend probably goes back to Jewish tradition, to stories like the one mentioned in the Zohar. When Adam was in paradise, God sent the holy angel Raziel, the keeper of the higher secrets, to him with a book in which the higher holy wisdom was set forth. In this book, 72 kinds of wisdom were described in 670 sections. By means of this book there were given to him 1,500 keys to wisdom, which were known to none of the higher holy men, and all remained secret until this book came to Adam. Henceforth he kept this book hid and secret, daily using this treasure of the Lord, which discovered to him the higher secrets of which even the foremost angels knew nothing, until he was driven out of paradise. But when he sinned and transgressed the command of the Lord, this book fled from him. He bequeathed it to his son Seth, and from Seth it came to Enoch, and from him to Abraham. In the Clementine Homilies, 2nd Cent, Adam is the first of a series of 8 incarnations of the true prophet. The last is Jesus. This idea of a pre-existent seer may spring from Jewish or Judeo-Christian tradition, but in China it is vividly realized in the figure of Pan Ku. He is represented as a dwarf clad in a bear skin or in leaves. On his head he has 2 horns. He proceeded from Yang and Yin, fashioned the chaos, and created heaven and earth. He was helped by 4 symbolic animals, the unicorn, the phoenix, the tortoise, and the dragon. He is also represented with the sun in one hand and the moon in the other. In another version, he has a dragon's head and a snake's body. He changed himself into the earth with all its creatures, and thus proved to be a real Homo maximus and anthropos. Pan Ku is of Taoist origin, and nothing seems to be known of him before the 4th century AD. He reincarnated himself in Yuan Shi Tiansun, the first cause and the highest in heaven. As the fount of truth, he announces the secret teaching, which promises immortality, to every new age. After completing the work of creation, he gave up his bodily form and found himself aimlessly floating in empty space. He therefore desired rebirth in visible form. At length he found a holy virgin, 40 years old, who lived alone on a mountain, where she nourished herself on air and clouds. She was hermaphroditic, the embodiment of both yang and yin. Every day she collected the quintessence of sun and moon. Pan Ku was attracted by her virgin purity, and once, when she breathed in, he entered into her in the form of a ray of light, so that she became pregnant. The pregnancy lasted for 12 years, and the birth took place from the spinal column. From then on, she was called Taiyuan Shengmu, the Holy Mother of the First Cause. The relatively late date of the legend leaves the possibility of Christian influence open. All the same, its analogy with Christian and Persian ideas does not prove its dependence on these sources. The series of 8 incarnations of the true prophet is distinguished by the special position of the 8th, namely Christ. The 8th prophet is not merely the last in the series. He corresponds to the first and is at the same time the fulfillment of the 7 and signifies the entry into a new order. I have shown in Psychology and Alchemy, Pars 200 FF, with the help of a modern dream, that whereas the 7 form an uninterrupted series, the step to the 8th involves hesitation or uncertainty and is a repetition of the same phenomenon that occurs with 3 and 4, the axiom of Maria. It is very remarkable that we meet it again in the Taoist series of 8 immortals, Xianyan. The 7 are great sages or saints who dwell in heaven or on the earth, but the 8th is a girl who sweeps up the fallen flowers at the southern gate of heaven. The parallel to this is Grimm's tale of the 7 ravens. There the 7 brothers have one sister. One is reminded in this connection of Sophia, of whom Irenaeus says, "This mother they also call the Ogdoad, Sophia, Terra, Jerusalem, Holy Spirit, and with a masculine reference, Lord. She is below and outside the pleroma." The same thought occurs in connection with the 7 planets in Celsus's description of the diagram of the Ophites, attacked by Origen. This diagram is what I would call a mandala, an ordering pattern or pattern of order which is either consciously devised or appears spontaneously as a product of unconscious processes. The description Origin gives of the diagram is unfortunately not particularly clear, but at least we can make out that it consisted of 10 circles, presumably concentric, since he speaks of a circumference and a center. The outermost circle was labeled Leviathan, and the innermost Behemoth, the two apparently coinciding, for Leviathan was the name for the center as well as the circumference. At the same time, the impious diagram said that the Leviathan is the soul that has permeated the universe. Origin had got hold of a diagram like the one used by Celsus and discovered in it the names of the 7 angels Celsus alludes to. The prince of these angels was called the accursed god, and they themselves were called sometimes gods of light and sometimes archons. The accursed god refers to the Judeo-Christian world creator, as Origin duly notes. Yahweh appears here obviously as the prince and father of the 7 archons. The first of them had a lion's form and was named Michael. The second was a bull and was named Suriel, the bull-formed. The third, Raphael, had the form of a snake. The fourth, named Gabriel, the form of an eagle. The fifth, Thouthabaoth, the form of a bear. The sixth, Eratoth, the form of a dog. And the seventh had the form of an ass and was called Onoel, or Taphabaoth, or Tharthatauth. It is to be presumed that these names were distributed among the 8 inner circles. The 7 archons correspond to the 7 planets and represent so many spheres with doors which the celebrant has to pass through on his ascent. Here, says Origin, is the origin of the Ogdoad, which, clearly, must consist of the 7 and their father Yahweh. At this point, Origin mentions as the 1st and 7th Ialdabaoth, of whom we have not heard before. This supreme archon, as we know from other sources too, is lion-headed or lion-like. He would therefore correspond to Michael in the Ophitic diagram, the first in the list of archons. Ialdabaoth means child of chaos. Thus he is the firstborn of a new order that supersedes the original state of chaos. As the first son, he is the last of the series, a feature he shares with Adam and also with Leviathan, who, as we have seen, is both circumference and center. These analogies suggest that the diagram showed a series of concentric circles. The old world picture, with the earth as the center of the universe, consisted of various heavens, spherical layers or spheres, arranged concentrically round the center and named after the planets. The outermost planetary sphere or archon was Saturn. Outside this would be the sphere of the fixed stars, corresponding to Leviathan as the 10th circle in the diagram, unless we postulated some place for the demiurge or for the father or mother of the archons. It is evident from the text that an Ogdoad is meant, as in the system of Ptolemy reported by Irenaeus. There the 8th sphere was called Achamoth, Sophia Sapientia, and was of feminine nature, just as in Damascius the hebdomad was attributed to Kronos and the Ogdoad to Rhea. In our text, the Virgin Prunicus is connected with the mandala of 7 circles. They have further added on top of one another sayings of the prophets, circles included in circles, and a power flowing from a certain Prunicus, a virgin, a living soul. The circles included in circles point decisively to a concentric arrangement as we find it, significantly enough, in Herodotus's description of the 7 circular walls of Ecbatana. The ramparts of these walls were all painted in different colors. Of the 2 innermost and highest walls, one was silvered and the other gilded. The walls obviously represented the concentric circles of the planets, each characterized by a special color. In the introduction to his diagram, Celsus reports on the idea, found among the Persians and in the Mithraic mysteries, of a stairway with 7 doors and an 8th door at the top. The first door was Saturn and was correlated with lead, and so on. The 7th door was gold and signified the sun. The colors are also mentioned. The stairway represents the passage of the soul, anime transitus. The 8th door corresponds to the sphere of the fixed stars. The archetype of the 7 appears again in the division of the week and the naming of its days, and in the musical octave, where the last note is always the beginning of a new cycle. This may be a cogent reason why the 8th is feminine. It is the mother of a new series. In Clement's line of prophets, the 8th is Christ. As the first and second Adam, he rounds off the series of 7, just as, according to Gregory the Great, he, coming in the flesh, joined the Pleiades, for he had within himself, at once and forever, the works of the sevenfold Holy Spirit. These references should suffice to show the special nature of the eighth and its tendency to be feminine in Christian gnosis. Adam's dual nature reappears in Christ. He is male-female. Boehme expresses this by saying that Christ was a virgin in mind. She is an image of the holy number 3, eternally uncreated and ungenerated. Where the Word is, there is the virgin, for the Word is in her. She is the woman's seed, which shall bruise the head of the serpent. Gen 3:15. He who shall tread on its head is Christ, who thus appears identical with the seed of the woman or with the virgin. In Boehme, the virgin has the character of an anima, for she is given to be a companion to thee in thy soul, and at the same time, as divine power and wisdom, she is in heaven and in paradise. God took her to him to be his spouse. She expresses all the profundity and infinity of the Godhead, thus corresponding to the Indian Shakti. The androgynous unity of Shiva and Shakti is depicted in tantric iconography as permanent cohabitation. Boehme's ideas had a strong influence on Franz von Baader, who asserted that God gave Adam a helpmeet, a jutor, through whom Adam was to have brought forth without an external woman, as Mary did without a man. But Adam fell for the bestial act of copulation and was in danger of himself sinking to the level of a beast. God, recognizing this possibility, thereupon created Eve as a salutary counter-institution, Rettende Gegenanstalt, to prevent an otherwise unavoidable and deeper descent of man into animal nature. When Adam threatened to sink into it, nevertheless, his divine androgyny departed from him, but was preserved in Eve as the woman's seed, with the help of which man would free himself from the seed of the serpent. For he who was born in the Virgin Mary is the same who had to depart from Adam on account of his fall. The presence of a divine pair or androgen in the human soul is touched upon by Origen. They say that as the sun and moon stand as the two great lights in the firmament of heaven, so in us Christ and the Church. And thus, too, Adam and Eve are in each of us, as Gregory the Great says, Adam standing for the spirit, Eve for the flesh. Origen, like Clement of Rome, credits Adam with the gift of prophecy, for he prophesied a great mystery in Christ and the Church, saying, Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Gen 2, see 19:5 and Mark 10:7. I shall end this account of the excellent equipment of the first man with an Arabian legend, which is not without a deeper meaning. When Adam left paradise, God sent the angel Gabriel to him with an offer of 3 gifts, of which he should choose one: modesty, intelligence, and religion. Without hesitation, Adam chose intelligence. Thereupon, Gabriel commanded modesty and religion to return at once to heaven, but they refused, invoking God's own command never to part from intelligence, wherever it might be found. For the prophet had said, Never submit to one who has no trace of intelligence. 4. The polarity of Adam. There has always existed a widely felt need to think of the first man as having a light nature, hence the frequent comparison with the sun. The alchemists did not insist on this aspect, so I need say only a few words about it here. Usually, however, in the non-alchemical literature, Adam is a light figure whose splendor even outshines that of the sun. He lost his radiance owing to the fall. Here we have a hint of his dual nature, on the one hand shining and perfect, on the other dark and earthy. Haggadic interpretation derives his name from Adama, earth. His dual nature is confirmed by Origen. One Adam was made out of earth, the other after the image and likeness of God. He is our inner man, invisible, incorporeal, unspotted, and immortal. Similar views are expressed by Philo. It is worth noting that in Colossians 1:15, Christ is this image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Adam's dual nature is reflected in his hermaphroditism. Thus Dorn says that the fiery and perfect Mercurius is the true hermaphroditic Adam. This idea occurs among the Nascinis. These men, says Hippolytus, worship as the beginning of all things, according to their own statement, a man and a son of man. But this man is masculo-feminine and is called by them Adamus, and hymns to him are many and various. He quotes as an example, From thee the Father, through thee the Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the aeons, O citizen of heaven, O man of the great name. Adam is masculo-feminine also in Jewish tradition. In Midrash Rabbah 8:1, he is an androgen, or a man and woman grown into one body with two faces. God sawed the body in two and made each half a back. Through his androgyny, Adam has affinities with Plato's sphere-shaped original being, as well as with the Persian Gayomart. This idea has left a few traces in alchemy. For instance, Glauber attributes the sign of the circle to Adam and the square to Eve. The circle is usually the sign for gold and sun. It is found in the latter sense in the Book of the Cave of Treasures. Then God made Adam, and when the angels saw his glorious appearance, they were moved by the beauty of the sight, for they saw the form of his countenance, while it was enkindled, in shining splendor like to the ball of the sun, and the light of his eyes like to the sun, and the form of his body like to the light of a crystal. An Arabic Hermes text on the creation of Adam relates that, when the virgin, Eve, came to power, the angel Horus arose from the unanimous will of the planets. This Horus took 60 spirits from the planets, 83 from the zodiac, 90 from the highest heaven, 127 from the earth, 360 spirits in all, mixed them together and created out of them Adamanus, the first man, after the form of the highest heaven. The number 360 and the form of heaven both indicate his circular shape. Aside, however, from his androgyny, there is a fundamental polarity in Adam, which is based on the contradiction between his physical and spiritual nature. This was felt very early, and is expressed in the view of Rabbi Jeremiah ben Elazar, that Adam must have had two faces, in accordance with his interpretation of Psalm 139:5, "Thou hast beset me behind and before," and in the Islamic view that Adam's soul was created thousands of years before his body, and then refused to enter the figure made of clay, so that God had to put it in by force. According to a rabbinic view, Adam even had a tail. His condition at first was altogether most inauspicious. As he lay still inanimate on the ground, he was of a greenish hue, with thousands of impure spirits fluttering round, who all wanted to get into him. But God shooed them away till only one remained, Lilith, the mistress of spirits, who succeeded in so attaching herself to Adam's body that she became pregnant by him. Only when Eve appeared did she fly away again. The demonic Lilith seems to be a certain aspect of Adam, for the legend says that she was created with him from the same earth. It throws a bad light on Adam's nature when we are told that countless demons and spooks arose from his nocturnal emissions, ex nocturno seminis fluxu. This happened during the 130 years which he had to spend apart from Eve, banished from the heavenly court, under the anathema of excommunication. In Gnosticism, the original man Adamus, who is nothing but a paraphrase of Adam, was equated with the ithyphallic Hermes and with Corribus, the pederastic seducer of Dionysus, as well as with the ithyphallic Kabiri. In the Pistis Sophia we meet a Sabaoth Adamus, the ruler of the Aeons, who fights against the light of Pistis Sophia and is thus wholly on the side of evil. According to the teachings of the Bogomils, Adam was created by Satanael, God's first son and the fallen angel, out of mud. But Satanael was unable to bring him to life, so God did it for him. Adam's interconnection with Satan is likewise suggested in rabbinic tradition, where Adam will one day sit on Satan's throne. As the first man, Adam is the Homo Maximus, the Anthropos, from whom the macrocosm arose, or who is the macrocosm. He is not only the prima materia, but a universal soul, which is also the soul of all men. According to the Mandaeans, he is the mystery of the worlds. The conception of the Anthropos first penetrated into alchemy through Zosimos, for whom Adam was a dual figure, the fleshly man and the man of light. I have discussed the significance of the Anthropos idea at such length in psychology and alchemy that no further documentation is needed here. I shall therefore confine myself to material that is of historical interest in following the thought processes of the alchemists. Already in Zosimos, three sources can be distinguished: Jewish, Christian, and pagan. In later alchemy, the pagan syncretistic element naturally fades into the background to leave room for the predominance of the Christian element. In the 16th century, the Jewish element becomes noticeable again, under the influence of the Kabbalah, which had been made accessible to a wider public by Johann Reuchlin and Pico della Mirandola. Somewhat later, the humanists then made their contribution from the Hebrew and Aramaic sources and, especially from the Zohar, In the 18th century, an allegedly Jewish treatise appeared, Abraham Eleazar's Uraltes Chemish's work, making copious use of Hebraic terminology and claiming to be the mysterious Rindenbuch of Abraham the Jew, which, it was said, had revealed the art of gold-making to Nicholas Flamel, 1330 to 1417. In this treatise there is the following passage: "For Noah must wash me in the deepest sea, with pain and toil, that my blackness may depart. I must lie here in the deserts among many serpents, and there is none to pity me. I must be fixed to this black cross, and must be cleansed therefrom with wretchedness and vinegar, and made white, that the inwards of my head may be like the sun or Marez, and my heart may shine like a carbuncle, and the old Adam come forth again from me. O Adam Kadmon, how beautiful art thou, and adorned with the rikmah of the King of the world. Like Kedar I am black henceforth. Ah, how long? O come, my Mesech, and disrobe me, that mine inner beauty may be revealed. O that the serpent roused up Eve, to which I must testify with my black color that clings to me, and that is become mine by the curse of this persuasion, and therefore am I unworthy of all my brothers. O Sulamith afflicted within and without, the watchmen of the great city will find thee and wound thee, strip thee of thy garments and smite thee, and take away thy veil. Yet shall I be blessed again, when I am delivered from the poison brought upon me by the curse, and mine inmost seed and first birth comes forth. For its father is the sun, and its mother the moon. Yea, I know else of no other bridegroom who should love me, because I am so black. Ah, do thou tear down the heavens and melt my mountains, for thou didst crumble the mighty kingdoms of Canaan like dust, and crush them with the brazen serpent of Joshua, and offer them up to Algir fire, that she who is encompassed by many mountains may be freed. It is evident that the speaker is the feminine personification of the prima materia in the Nigredo state. Psychologically, this dark figure is the unconscious anima. In this condition, she corresponds to the nefesh of the Kabbalists. She is desire, for as Nor von Rosenroth trenchantly remarks, the mother is nothing but the inclination of the father for the lower. The blackness comes from Eve's sin. Sulamith, the Shulamite, and Eve, Hawa, earth, are contaminated into a single figure, who contains in herself the first Adam, like the mother her child, and at the same time awaits the second Adam, i.e. Adam before the fall, the perfect original man, as her lover and bridegroom. She hopes to be freed by him from her blackness. Here again we encounter the mysticism of the Song of Songs, as in the Aurora Consurgens or. Jewish gnosis, Kabbalah, combines with Christian mysticism. Sponsis and Sponsa are called on the one hand Tifereth and Malchuth, and on the other Christ and the Church. The mysticism of the Song of Songs appeared in Jewish Gnostic circles during the 3rd and 4th centuries, as is proved by the fragments of a treatise called Shiur Koma, the measure of the body. It concerns a mysticism only superficially Judaicized by references to the description of the beloved in the Song of Songs. The figure of Tifereth belongs to the Sephiroth system, which is conceived to be a tree. Tifereth occupies the middle position. Adam Kadmon is either the whole tree, or is thought of as the mediator between the supreme authority, En Sof, and the Sephiroth. The black Shulamite in our text corresponds to Malkuth as a widow, who awaits union with Tifereth and hence the restoration of the original wholeness. Accordingly, Adam Kadmon here takes the place of Tifereth. He is mentioned in Philo and in the Midrashic tradition. From the latter source comes the distinction between the heavenly and earthly Adam in Ichor 1547. The first man was of the earth, earthy. The second man is from heaven, heavenly, DV. In verse 45, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit, DV. Thus the original Hilic psychic man is contrasted with the later pneumatic man. The Tractatus de Revolutionibus Animarum of Nor von Rosenroth 10 contains a passage which is of importance for the psychological interpretation of Adam. Ezekiel 34:31 says, "Ye are Adam." This means, you are rightly called by the name of Adam. The meaning is, if the text were to be understood literally, it could rightly be objected that all the peoples of the world or the Gentiles are men after the same manner as the Israelites, that is, of upright stature. Wherefore it would have to be said, "Ye are men." But in truth, the meaning is this: out of your souls was composed the microcosm of Adam. Partus 11. Ye are Adam. He says, as it were, that all the souls of the Israelites were in truth nothing but the first created Adam. And you were his sparks and his limbs. Here Adam appears on the one hand as the body of the people of Israel, and on the other as its general soul. This conception can be taken as a projection of the interior Adam. The Homo Maximus appears as a totality, as the self of the people. As the inner man, however, he is the totality of the individual, the synthesis of all parts of the psyche, and therefore of the conscious and the unconscious. Clough 20 says, "And therefore our masters have said, the Son of David shall not come until all the souls that were in the body of the first created have fully gone out." The going out of the souls from the primordial man can be understood as the projection of a psychic integration process. The saving wholeness of the inner man, i.e. the Messiah, cannot come about until all parts of the psyche have been made conscious. This may be sufficient to explain why it takes so long for the second Adam to appear. The same treatise says, "From En Sof, from the most general one, was produced the universe, which is Adam Kadmon, who is one in many, and of whom and in whom are all things." The differences of genera are denoted by concentric circles, which proceed from him or are contained in him. He is thus something like a schema of the psychic structure, in which the specific differences, those characterizing species, are denoted by a straight line, i.e. in a concentric system by the radius. Thus in Adam Kadmon are represented all the orders of things, both genera and species and individuals. Among the pagan sources we must distinguish an Egyptian one, concerned with the very ancient tradition of the god-man Osiris and the theology of kingship, a Persian one derived from Gaiamart, and an Indian one derived from Purusha. The Christian source for alchemical ideas is the aforementioned Pauline doctrine of the first and second Adam. 5. The Old Adam. After these preliminary remarks, we can turn back to Eliezer's text, beginning with the significant passage in the middle where Adam appears. The reader is immediately struck by the expression "the Old Adam," who is evidently equated with Adam Kadmon. Rather than "the Old Adam," we would expect "the second" or "the original Adam," chiefly because "the Old Adam" means above all the old, sinful, unredeemed man, in accordance with Romans 6:6. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. That this passage must have been at the back of the author's mind is shown by the sentence, "I must be fixed to this black cross, and must be cleansed therefrom with wretchedness and vinegar." The author purports to be a Jew, but was clumsy enough not only to perpetrate anachronisms, but to reveal his own unquestionably Christian psychology. He had a good knowledge of the Bible and was familiar with biblical language. The language of his book is the stylistically and grammatically fluid German of the 18th century. He has a liking for edifying rhetoric. Could he have been a theologian? One thing is clear at any rate, and that is that the expression "the old Adam" on the lips of such a person can have only one meaning, namely the old man whom we are to put off, Eph 4:22, in accordance with the command in Colossians 3:9, "Put off the old man with his deeds." These passages must have been known to the author, and he could easily have avoided the resultant contradiction or ambiguity by putting, instead of old, original, or something of that kind. I must beg the reader's indulgence for apparently splitting hairs and harping somewhat pedantically on this little defect in the style of a none too careful author. But it is more than a question of a mere slip of the pen. A text that is riddled with ambiguities, that sets up the most unexpected relationships, Adam and the Shulamite, and blends together the most heterogeneous situations, has unquestionable affinities with the structure of a dream, and consequently necessitates a careful examination of its figures. A cliché like "the old Adam," which can have no other meaning, does not occur in a dream text without a very good reason, even though the author might have excused it as a mere slip. Even if, as seems to be the case here, he understood the old Adam as the or original Adam, he was compelled by some obscure intention to pick on the old Adam, which in this context is thoroughly ambiguous. Had it occurred in a real dream, it would be a technical blunder for the interpreter to overlook this ostensible slip. As we know, these quid pro quos invariably happen at the critical places, where two contrary tendencies cross. Our suspicions have been aroused, and in what follows, we shall pursue them on the assumption that the old Adam is not a mere accident, but is one of those irritating ambiguities of which there is no lack in the alchemical texts. They are irritating because seldom, if ever, can it be ascertained with any certainty whether they arose from a conscious intention to deceive or from an unconscious conflict. The old Adam, evidently, can come forth again from the Shulamite, the Black Mother, only because he had once got into her in some way. But that can only have been the old, sinful Adam, for the blackness of the Shulamite is an expression for sin, the original sin, as the text shows. Behind this idea lies the archetype of the anthropos, who had fallen under the power of physis, but it seems doubtful whether our author had any conscious knowledge of this myth. Had he really been familiar with Kabbalistic thought, he would have known that Adam Kadmon, the spiritual first man, was an idea in the Platonic sense, which could never be confused with the sinful man. By his equation old Adam equals Adam Kadmon, the author has contaminated two opposites. The interpretation of this passage must therefore be, from the black Shulamite comes forth the antithesis old Adam, Adam Kadmon. Her obvious connection with the earth as the mother of all living things makes it clear that her son was the sinful Adam, but not Adam Kadmon, who, as we have seen, is an emanation of Ensof. Nevertheless, by contaminating the two, the text makes both of them issue from the Shulamite. The old Adam and the primordial man appear to be identical, and the author could excuse himself by saying that by old, he meant the first or original Adam, a point which it is not easy to deny. As high as the primordial man stands on the one side, so low on the other is the sinful empirical man. The phenomenon of contamination, which we meet so frequently in the psychology of dreams and of primitives, is no mere accident, but is based on a common denominator. At some point, the opposites prove to be identical, and this implies the possibility of their contamination. One of the commonest instances of this is the identity of the god and his animal attribute. Such paradoxes derive from the non-human quality of the gods and the animal's psychology. The divine psyche is as far above the human as the animal psyche reaches down into subhuman depths. The old Adam corresponds to the primitive man, the shadow of our present-day consciousness, and the primitive man has his roots in the animal man, the tailed Adam, who has long since vanished from our consciousness. Even the primitive man has become a stranger to us, so that we have to rediscover his psychology. It was therefore something of a surprise when analytical psychology discovered in the products of the unconscious of modern man so much archaic material, and not only that, but the sinister darkness of the animal world of instinct. Though instincts, or drives, can be formulated in physiological and biological terms, they cannot be pinned down in that way, for they are also psychic entities which manifest themselves in a world of fantasy peculiarly their own. They are not just physiological or consistently biological phenomena, but are at the same time, even in their content, meaningful fantasy structures with a symbolic character. An instinct does not apprehend its object blindly and at random, but brings to it a certain psychic viewpoint or interpretation. For every instinct is linked a priori with a corresponding image of the situation, as can be proved indirectly in cases of the symbiosis of plant and animal. In man we have direct insight into that remarkable world of magical ideas, which cluster round the instincts and not only express their form and mode of manifestation, but trigger them off. The world of instinct, simple as it seems to the rationalist, reveals itself on the primitive level as a complicated interplay of physiological facts, taboos, rites, class systems, and tribal lore, which impose a restrictive form on the instinct from the beginning, preconsciously, and make it serve a higher purpose. Under natural conditions, a spiritual limitation is set upon the unlimited drive of the instinct to fulfill itself, which differentiates it and makes it available for different applications. Rites on a primitive level are uninterpreted gestures. On a higher level, they become mythologized. The primary connection between image and instinct explains the interdependence of instinct and religion in the most general sense. These two spheres are in mutually compensatory relationship, and by instinct we must understand not merely eros, but everything that goes by the name of instinct. Religion on the primitive level means the psychic regulatory system that is coordinated with the dynamism of instinct. On a higher level, this primary interdependence is sometimes lost, and then religion can easily become an antidote to instinct, whereupon the originally compensatory relationship degenerates into conflict, religion petrifies into formalism, and instinct is vitiated. A split of this kind is not due to a mere accident, nor is it a meaningless catastrophe. It lies rather in the nature of the evolutionary process itself, in the increasing extension and differentiation of consciousness. For just as there is no energy without the tension of opposites, so there can be no consciousness without the perception of differences. But any stronger emphasis of differences leads to polarity and finally to a conflict which maintains the necessary tension of opposites. This tension is needed on the one hand for increased energy production and on the other for the further differentiation of differences, both of which are indispensable requisites for the development of consciousness. But although this conflict is unquestionably useful, it also has very evident disadvantages, which sometimes prove injurious. Then a counter-movement sets in the attempt to reconcile the conflicting parties. As this process has repeated itself countless times in the course of the many thousand years of conscious development, corresponding customs and rites have grown up for the purpose of bringing the opposites together. These reconciling procedures are rites performed by man, but their content is an act of help or reconciliation emanating from the divine sphere, whether in the present or in the past. Generally, the rites are linked up with the original state of man and with events that took place in the age of the heroes or ancestors. This is, as a rule, a defective state or a situation of distress which is helped by divine intervention, and the intervention is repeated in the rite. To take a simple example, when the rice will not grow, a member of the rice totem clan builds himself a hut in the rice field and tells the rice how it originally grew from the rice ancestor. The rice then remembers its origin and starts growing again. The ritual anamnesis of the ancestor has the same effect as his intervention. The prime situation of distress consists either in a withdrawal of the favorable gods and the emergence of harmful ones, or in the alienation of the gods by man's negligence, folly, or sacrilege, or else, as in the Taoist view, in the separation of heaven and earth for unfathomable reasons, so that they can now come together again only if the wise man reestablishes Tao in himself by ritual meditation. In this way, he brings his own heaven and earth into harmony. Just as the rice spoils in the defective state, so too man degenerates, whether from the malignity of the gods or from his own stupidity or sin, and comes into conflict with his original nature. He forgets his origination from the human ancestor, and a ritual anamnesis is therefore required. Thus the archetype of man, the anthropos, is constellated and forms the essential core of the great religions. In the idea of the Homo Maximus, the above and below of creation are reunited. 6. The transformation. The appearance of Adam Kadmon has characteristic consequences for the Shulamite. It brings about a solification, an illumination of the inwards of the head. This is a veiled but, for the psychology of alchemy, typical allusion to the transfiguration, glorification of the adept or of his inner man. For Adam is interior homo noster, the primordial man in us. Seen in the light of the above remarks, Elazar's text assumes a by no means uninteresting aspect, and since its train of thought is characteristic of the basic ideas of alchemy, a meaning with many facets. It depicts a situation of distress corresponding to the alchemical nigredo. The blackness of guilt has covered the bridal earth as with black paint. The Shulamite comes into the same category as those black goddesses, Isis, Artemis, Parvati, Mary, whose names mean earth. Eve, like Adam, ate of the tree of knowledge and thereby broke into the realm of divine privileges. Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. In other words, she inadvertently discovered the possibility of moral consciousness, which until then had been outside man's range. As a result, a polarity was torn open with momentous consequences. There was a sundering of earth from heaven. The original paradise was shut down. The glory of the first man was extinguished. Malchuth became a widow. The fiery yang went back aloft, and the damp yin enveloped humanity with darkness, degenerated through ever-increasing wantonness, and finally swelled into the black waters of the deluge, which threatened to drown every living thing, but on the other hand, could be understood more hopefully as an ablution of the blackness. Noah, too, appears in a different light. He is no longer seen as someone ruining away from the catastrophe, but as Lord of the waters, the minister of the ablution. This operation does not seem to be enough, however, for the Shulamite promptly gets herself into the opposite kind of pickle, into the dry desert, where, like the children of Israel, she is menaced by evil in the form of poisonous serpents. This is an allusion to the tribulations of the Exodus, which in a sense was a repetition of the expulsion from paradise, since bidding farewell to the fleshpots of Egypt was quite as painful a prospect as the stony ground from which our first parents had to wrest a living in the sweat of their brows. But even with this last extremity, the goal is not reached, for the Shulamite has still to be fixed to a black cross. The idea of the cross points beyond the simple antithesis to a double antithesis, i.e., to a quaternio. To the mind of the alchemist, this meant primarily the intercrossing elements, or the four qualities. We know that this fastening to a cross denotes a painful state of suspension, or a tearing asunder in the four directions. The alchemists therefore set themselves the task of reconciling the warring elements and reducing them to unity. In our text, this state is abolished when the distressing blackness is washed off with wretchedness and vinegar. This is an obvious allusion to the hyssop and gall which Christ was given to drink. In the oft-quoted text of Mayer, wretchedness and vinegar stand for the melancholia of the Negredo, as contrasted with the joy and gladness of the redeemed state. The washing with wretchedness and vinegar finally brings about the whitening as well as a solidification of the inwards of the head, presumably the brain or even the soul. We can only interpret this as meaning that the Shulamite experienced a transformation similar to Parvati's, who, saddened by her blackness, was given a golden skin by the gods. Here we must emphasize that it is the lapis or hermaphrodite which, as the god who is quartered or torn asunder or crucified on the four, represents and suffers the discord of the elements, and at the same time brings about the union of the four, and besides that is identical with the product of the union. The alchemists could not help identifying their primordial man with Christ, for whom our author substitutes Adam Kadmon. Since sun and gold are equivalent concepts in alchemy, the solidification means that the inwards of the head, whatever we are to understand by that, are transformed into light, or mares, the precious white earth. The Shulamite's heart, too, will shine like a carbuncle. From the time of the Middle Ages, the carbuncle was regarded as a synonym for the lapis. Here the allegory is transparent, as the head is illuminated, so the heart burns in love. The difference between Parvati and the Shulamite is, therefore, that whereas Parvati is transformed outwardly, the Shulamite is transformed inwardly. Outwardly she remains as black as ever. Unlike the Shulamite of the Song of Songs, whose skin is swarthy, our Shulamite declares that her blackness clings to her as if painted on, and that one has only to disrobe her to bring her inner beauty to light. By the sin of Eve, she is plunged, as it were, in ink, in the tincture, and blackened, just as in Islamic legend, the precious stone that Allah gave Adam was blackened by his sin. If the poison of the curse is taken from her, which will obviously happen when the beloved appears, then her innermost seed, her first birth, will come forth. According to the text, this birth can refer only to the appearance of Adam Kadmon. He is the only one who loves her despite her blackness. But this blackness seems to be rather more than a veneer, for it will not come off. It is merely compensated by her inner illumination and by the beauty of the bridegroom. As the Shulamite symbolizes the earth in which Adam lay buried, she also has the significance of a maternal progenitrix. In this capacity, the black Isis put together again the limbs of her dismembered brother-spouse, Osiris. Thus Adam Kadmon appears here in the classic form of the sun-lover, who in the hieroskimos of sun and moon reproduces himself in the mother-beloved. Consequently, the Shulamite takes over the ancient role of the hierodule of Ishtar. She is the sacred harlot, Meretrix, which is one of the names the alchemist gave his arcane substance. The Shulamite's reversion to type is not a stroke of genius on the part of our author, but merely the traditional alchemical view that our infant, the son of the philosophers, is the child of sun and moon, but insofar as he represents the hermaphroditic primordial man himself, the sun is at the same time the father of his parents. Alchemy was so saturated with the idea of the mother-son incest that it automatically reduced the Shulamite of the Song of Songs to her historical prototype. We have paid due attention to the recalcitrant nature of the Shulamite's blackness. Now, it is significant that the old Adam is mentioned at the very moment when the perfect prelapsarian Adam, the shining primordial man, is obviously meant. Just as the black Shulamite misses the final apotheosis, the total albedo, so we lack the necessary confirmation that the first Adam is changed into the second, who at the same time is the father of the first. We cannot suppress the suspicion that, just as the blackness will not disappear, so the old Adam will not finally change. This may be the deeper reason why the expression, the old Adam, did not worry the author, but on the contrary, seemed just right. It is, unfortunately, far truer to say that a change for the better does not bring a total conversion of darkness into light and of evil into good, but at most is a compromise in which the better slightly exceeds the worse. The complication introduced by the old Adam, therefore, does not seem to be merely fortuitous, since it forms a factor in an archetypal quaternio composed as follows. 612. This structure corresponds to the marriage quaternio discussed in the Psychology of the Transference, which is based on certain psychic facts and has the following structure. Although this quaternio plays a considerable role in alchemy, it is not a product of alchemical speculation, but an archetype which can be traced back to the primitive marriage class system, four-kin system. As a quaternity, it represents a whole judgment and formulates the psychic structure of man's totality. This expresses, on the one hand, the structure of the individual, i.e., a male or female ego in conjunction with the contrasexual unconscious, and on the other hand, the ego's relation to the other sex, without which the psychological individual remains incomplete. By this I mean primarily a psychic relationship. But in this schema, the idea of transformation, so characteristic of alchemy, is missing. As a scientific discipline, empirical psychology is not in a position to establish whether the conscious ego ranks higher or lower than the anima, which, like the ego, has a positive and a negative aspect. Science does not make value judgments, and though psychology has a concept of value, it is nothing but a concept of intensity. One complex of ideas has a higher value when its power of assimilation proves stronger than that of another. The alchemical idea of transformation is rooted in a spiritual concept of value, which takes the transformed as being more valuable, better, higher, more spiritual, etc., and the empirical psychologist has nothing to set against this. But since evaluating and estimating are functions of feeling and nevertheless do play a role in psychology, value must somehow be taken into account. This happens when an assertion or value judgment is accepted as an intrinsic part of the description of an object. The moral as well as the energetic value of the conscious and the unconscious personality is subject to the greatest individual variations. Generally, the conscious side predominates, though it suffers from numerous limitations. The schema of the psychological structure, if it is to be compared with the alchemical schema, must therefore be modified by the addition of the idea of transformation. This operation is conceivable in principle, as the process of making the anima and animus conscious does in fact bring about a transformation of personality. Hence, it is the psychotherapist who is principally concerned with this problem. The foremost of his therapeutic principles is that conscious realization is an important agent for transforming the personality. The favorable aspect of any such transformation is evaluated as improvement, primarily on the basis of the patient's own statements. The improvement refers in the first place to his psychic health, but there can also be a moral improvement. These statements become increasingly difficult or impossible to verify when the evaluation imperceptibly encroaches upon territory hedged about with philosophical or theoretical prejudices. The whole question of improvement is so delicate that it is far easier to settle it by arbitrary decision than by careful deliberation and comparison, which are an affront to all those terrible simplifiers who habitually cultivate this particular garden. Although the fact of transformation and improvement cannot be doubted, it is nevertheless very difficult to find a suitable term for it which is not open to misunderstanding and can be fitted into our schema. Medieval man, like our own simplifiers, was naive enough always to know what was better. We are not so sure, and besides this we feel to some extent answerable to those who hold a different opinion. We cannot cherish the joyful belief that everybody else is in the wrong. For this reason, we shall probably have to give up the idea of expressing in the terminology of our schema the kind of transformation which is bound up with conscious realization and the wholeness, individuation, it brings in its train. For a naive-minded person, the imperfect, corrupt old Adam is simply contrasted with the perfect, primordial man, and the dark Eve with an illuminated and altogether nobler being. The modern viewpoint is much more realistic, as it withdraws the archetypal schema which referred originally to a mythological situation, back from projection, and peoples the stage not with mythical lay figures but with real human beings and their psyches. The man, or the masculine ego consciousness, is then contrasted with an animus, the masculine figure in a woman's unconscious, who compels her either to overvalue him or to protest against him. The corresponding figure that contrasts with the woman and her feminine ego consciousness is the anima, the source of all the illusions, over and undervaluations of which a man makes himself guilty in regard to a woman. There is nothing to indicate in this schema that the man is better than the animus or vice versa, or that the anima is a higher being than the woman. Nor does it indicate in which direction the line of development is moving. Only one thing is clear, that when, as a result of a long technical and moral procedure, the patient obtains a knowledge of this structure based on experience and accepts the responsibility entailed by this knowledge, there follows an integration or completeness of the individual, who in this way approaches wholeness but not perfection, which is the ideal of certain world philosophies. In the Middle Ages, philosophy prevailed over fact to such an extent that the base metal lead was credited with the power to turn into gold under certain conditions, and the dark, psychic man with the capacity to turn himself into the higher, pneumatic man. But just as lead, which theoretically could become gold, never did so in practice, so the sober-minded man of our own day looks round in vain for the possibility of final perfection. Therefore, on an objective view of the facts, which alone is worthy of the name of science, he sees himself obliged to lower his pretensions a little, and instead of striving after the ideal of perfection, to content himself with the more accessible goal of approximate completeness. The progress thereby made possible does not lead to an exalted state of spiritualization, but rather to a wise self-limitation and modesty, thus balancing the disadvantages of the lesser good with the advantage of the lesser evil. What prevents us from setting up a psychological schema fully corresponding to the alchemical one is ultimately, therefore, the difference between the old and the modern view of the world, between medieval romanticism and scientific objectivity. The more critical view which I have outlined here on the objective basis of scientific psychology is, however, implied in the alchemical schema. For even as the old Adam comes forth again and is present in the schema, just as much as Adam Kadmon, so the blackness does not depart from the Shulamite, an indication that the transformation process is not complete, but is still going on. That being so, the old Adam is not yet put off, and the Shulamite has not yet become white. In the Kabbalistic view, Adam Kadmon is not merely the universal soul or psychologically the self, but is himself the process of transformation, its division into 3 or 4 parts, trimeria or tetrameria. The alchemical formula for this is the axiom of Maria. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the one as the fourth. The treatise of Rabbi Abraham Cohen Herrera says, Adam Kadmon proceeded from the simple and the one, and to that extent he is unity, but he also descended and fell into his own nature, and to that extent he is 2. And again he will return to the one which he has in him, and to the highest, and to that extent he is 3 and 4. This speculation refers to the essential name, the tetragrammaton, which is the 4 letters of God's name, 3 different, and the fourth a repetition of the second. In the Hebrew word YHVH, written without vowels, he is feminine and is assigned as a wife to Yod and to Vav. As a result, Yod and Vav are masculine, and the feminine he, though doubled, is identical and therefore a single unit. To that extent, the essential name is a triad, but since he is doubled, the name is also a tetrad or quaternity, a perplexity which coincides most strangely with the axiom of Maria. On the other hand, the tetragrammaton consists of a double marriage and thus agrees in an equally remarkable manner with our atom diagrams. The doubling of the feminine he is archetypal, since the marriage quaternio presupposes both the difference and the identity of the feminine figures. This is true also of the two masculine figures, as we have seen, though here their difference usually predominates. Not surprisingly, as these things are mostly products of the masculine imagination. Consequently, the masculine figure coincides with man's consciousness, where differences are practically absolute. Though the feminine figure is doubled, it is so little differentiated that it appears identical. This double yet identical figure corresponds exactly to the anima, who, owing to her usually unconscious state, bears all the marks of non-differentiation. If we apply these considerations to the alchemical schema, we shall be able to modify it in a way that was not possible with the psychological one. We thus arrive at a formula which reduces both to the same denominator. The critical point, namely the fact that the transformation is not complete, comes out in the text itself. The desired perfection is relegated to the future, that she who is encompassed by many mountains shall be freed. For this a divine miracle is needed, the crushing and burning of Canaan, the tearing down of heaven, and the melting of mountains. One can see from these tours de force the magnitude of the difficulties that have to be overcome before perfection is reached. The reference to the mountains which encompass the Shulamite has a strange parallel in Parvati, whose name means mountain dweller, and who was deemed the daughter of Himavat, Himalaya. Grieving over her blackness, for which her husband Shiva reproached her, she left him and withdrew to the solitude of the forest. And in her loneliness and seclusion the Shulamite exclaims, "What shall I say? I am alone among the hidden. Nevertheless I rejoice in my heart, because I can live privily, and refresh myself in myself. But under my blackness I have hidden the fairest green." The state of imperfect transformation merely hoped for and waited for does not seem to be one of torment only, but of positive, if hidden, happiness. It is the state of someone who, in his wanderings among the mazes of his psychic transformation, comes upon a secret happiness which reconciles him to his apparent loneliness. In communing with himself he finds not deadly boredom and melancholy, but an inner partner. More than that, a relationship that seems like the happiness of a secret love, or like a hidden springtime when the green seed sprouts from the barren earth, holding out the promise of future harvests. It is the alchemical benedicta viriditas, the blessed greenness, signifying on the one hand the leprosy of the metals, verdigris, but on the other the secret immanence of the divine spirit of life in all things. O blessed greenness, which generatest all things, cries the author of the Rosarium. Did not the Spirit of the Lord, writes Melius, which is a fiery love, give to the waters when it was born over them a certain fiery vigor, since nothing can be generated without heat? God breathed into created things a certain germination or greenness, by which all things should multiply. They called all things green, for to be green means to grow. Therefore this virtue of generation and the preservation of things might be called the soul of the world. Green signifies hope and the future, and herein lies the reason for the Shulamite's hidden joy, which otherwise would be difficult to justify. But in alchemy, green also means perfection. Thus Arnaldus de Villanova says, "Therefore Aristotle says in his book, our gold, not the common gold, because the green which is in this substance signifies its total perfection, since by our magistry that green is quickly turned into truest gold." Hence the Shulamite continues, "But I must be like a dove with wings, and I shall come and be free at vesper time, when the waters of impurity are abated with a green olive leaf. Then is my head of the fairest asphalt, and my hair curly gleaming as the persmith." And Job says 27:5, that out of my shall come forth blood. For it is all as shining red adama mingled with a glowing. Though I am poisonous, black, and hateful without, yet when I am cleansed I shall be the food of heroes, as out of the lion which Samson slew there afterward came forth honey. Therefore says Job 28:7, Semitam non cognovit ille avis, nice aspicit urn oculus vulturis. For this stone belongeth only to the proven and elect of God. It is the hope of the dark Shulamite that one day, at vesper time, probably in the evening of life, she will become like Noah's dove, which, with the olive leaf in its beak, announced the end of the flood, and appeared as the sign of God's reconciliation with the children of men. The Song of Songs 2:14 says, "Zero, my dove, that art in the clefts of the rock, in the secret places of the stairs, let me see thy countenance, let me hear thy voice." In our text, her head will be of gold, like the sun, and her hair like the moon. She thus declares herself to be a conjunction of the sun and moon. Indeed, a golden head and bushy hair are attributes of the beloved. She is, in fact, mingled with the beloved, from which it is evident that the perfect state melts sponsus and sponsa into one figure, the sun and moon child. The black Shulamite, well matched by her bushy locks black as a raven, becomes the moon, which in this way acquires its curly gleaming hair. 7. Rotundum, head and brain. Although the above passage from the Song of Songs is chiefly responsible for the golden head, it should be emphasized that this motif also occurs in alchemy without direct reference to the Song of Songs. His head was of fine gold, says the splendor souls of the dismembered man whose body was white like salt. In Greek alchemy, the adepts were called children of the golden head. The simple, i.e. arcane, substance was called the golden head after the god sent Daniel, God's mouthpiece. According to legend, Pope Sylvester II, d. 1003, famed as the transmitter of Arabian science, possessed a golden head that imparted oracles. This legend may perhaps date back to the Haranite ceremony of the oracular head. The head has also the subsidiary meaning of the corpus rotundum, signifying the arcane substance. This is particularly relevant to our text, as the inwards of the head turn to gold and or white earth. The latter is the terra alba foliata, foliated white earth, which in this case would be the brain. This conjecture is corroborated by the fact that the inwards of the head is, as it were, a literal translation of marrow in the head. Besides this, the brain is a synonym for the arcane substance, as is clear from a Hermes quotation in the Rosarium, "Take his brain, powder it with very strong vinegar, until it turns dark." The brain was of interest to the alchemist because it was the seat of the spirit of the supracelestial waters, the waters that are above the firmament, Genesis 1:7. In the Vigio Arislei, the brain of the king of the sea is the birthplace of the brother-sister pair. The Liber Quartorum calls the brain the abode of the divine part. For the brain has a proximity to the rational soul, which in turn possesses simplicitas, a feature it shares with God. Because the brain seemed secretly to participate in the alchemical process, Wei Poyang states that when the brain is properly tended for the required length of time, one will certainly attain the miracle. References to the brain are also found in Greek alchemy, an especially large role being played by the brainstone, which was equated with the stone that is no stone. The latter is one of the terms Zosimos uses for the brain. He also calls it not given and given by God, and the Mithraic secret. The treatise on the stone of philosophy says that alabaster is whitest brainstone. In the table of symbols in Penotis, the brain is correlated with the moon, the mystery of baptism, and the infernal gods. The new moon signifies the albedo and the white stone. Baptism has its parallel in the children of the king of the sea, who were imprisoned in the glass house at the bottom of the sea and transformed. The infernal gods can be correlated with the brain as the seat of consciousness and intelligence, for consciousness leads an ungodly existence, having fallen away from the divine totality. Zosimos is the connecting link between alchemy and Gnosticism, where we find similar ideas. There the brain, or cerebellum, is in shape like the head of a dragon. The wicked Corribas, having affinities on the one hand with Adam and on the other with the Chilenic Hermes, comes from the head on high and from the uncharacterized brain, and penetrates all things. We know not how and in what fashion he comes. Here Hippolytus paraphrases John 5:37. "We have heard his voice, but we have not seen his shape," an allusion to a partially unconscious factor. To emphasize this aspect, Hippolytus goes on to say that Corribas dwells in the image of clay, i.e., in man. "This," he continues, "is the God who dwells in the flood, of whom the Psalter says that he calls aloud and cries out from many waters. We can take this as the longing of the unconscious for consciousness. When one considers that this passage dates from an age, ca. 2nd cent, that had not the remotest conception of psychology in the modern sense, one must admit that Hippolytus, with the scanty means at his disposal, has managed to give a fairly decent account of the psychological facts. The Adam of whom the Nassim speak is a rock. This, they say, is Adamas, the chief cornerstone, who has become the head of the corner. For in the head is the characterized brain, the substance from which the whole family is, named Adam, whom I place in the foundations of Zion. Allegorically, they mean the image of man. But he who is so placed is Adam, the inner man, the foundation of Zion, who has fallen from Adam the archman on high. These extracts are sufficient to show how original are the bases of alchemical ideas. If no continuity of tradition can be proven, we would be forced to assume that the same ideas can arise spontaneously, again and again, from an archetypal foundation. 8. Adam as totality. Now that we have seen the significance of the brain and the moon earth as the arcane substance, we can take up our commentary on Eliezer's text. An alchemical recipe says, "Sow the gold in foliated white earth." Thus the gold sun and the white earth or moon are united. In Christianity, as in alchemy, earth and moon are closely related, conjoined by the figure of the Divine Mother. The sun-moon conjunction takes place in the head, an indication of the psychic nature of this event. As I said, the concept of the psychic, as we understand it today, did not exist in the Middle Ages, and even the educated modern man finds it difficult to understand what is meant by reality of the psyche. So it is not surprising that it was incomparably more difficult for medieval man to imagine something between esse in re and esse in intellectu solo. The way out lay in metaphysics. The alchemist was therefore compelled to formulate his quasi-chemical facts metaphysically too. Thus the white earth corresponds to the earth that signified mankind, is exalted above all the circles of the world, and placed in the intellectual heaven of the most holy Trinity, where, we may add, it is obviously added to the Trinity as the fourth, thereby making it a totality. This cheerful piece of heterodoxy remained unconscious, and its consequences never appeared on the surface. The conclusion which Eliezer draws requires elucidation. It is in itself remarkable that he should paraphrase, in connection with the perfect state, i.e., the coniunctio solis et lunae, just that passage in Job, Supra 6:24, and say, "Out of my earth shall come forth blood." This is feasible only if the coniunctio symbolizes the production of the hermaphroditic second Adam, namely Christ, and the corpus mysticum of the Church. In the ecclesiastical rite, the equivalent of the coniunctio is the mixing of substances, or the communion in both kinds. The passage from Job must therefore be interpreted as though Christ were speaking, "From my earth, my body, will come forth blood." In the Greek Orthodox rite, the loaf of bread stands for Christ's body. The priest pierces it with a small silver lance, to represent by analogy the wound in his side from which blood and grace flow, and perhaps also the slaying of the victim, Mactatio Christi. The alchemical earth, as we saw, is the arcane substance, here equated with the body of Christ and with Adama, the red earth of paradise. From Adama is traditionally derived the name Adam, so that here again the paradisal earth is connected with the corpus mysticum. This specifically Christian idea comports ill with the alleged Jewish authorship. Nevertheless, it is strange that, as Eliezer says, this earth is mingled with fire. This recalls the alchemical idea of the ignis gehennalis, the central fire by whose warmth all nature germinates and grows, because in it dwells the mercurial serpent, the salamander whom the fire does not consume, and the dragon that feeds on the fire. Though this fire is a portion of the fire of God's Spirit, Boehm's divine wrath fire, it is also Lucifer, the most beautiful of God's angels, who after his fall became the fire of hell itself. Eliezer says, "This old father-begetter will one day be drawn from the primordial chaos, and he is the fire-spewing dragon. The dragon floating in the air is the universal phaeton, the beginning of all things." Another source for the fire mingled with earth might be the image of the Son of Man in Revelation 1:14f. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. Here again the head is compared to the sun, combined with the whiteness of the full moon, but the feet stand in the fire and glow like molten metal. We find the lower fire in Job 28:5, Terra igne subversa est, the earth hath been overturned with fire, but out of it cometh bread, an image of the union of supreme opposites. In the apocalyptic image we would hardly recognize the Son of Man, who is the true incarnation of God's love. But actually this image comes nearer to the paradoxes of the alchemists than does the Christ of the Gospels, whose inner polarity was reduced to vanishing point after the "Get thee behind me, Satan" incident. In the apocalypse it becomes visible again, and even more so in the symbolism of alchemy. Our conjecture that Eliezer had in mind the apocalyptic figure of the Son of Man is confirmed to the extent that there is an illustration of the fils de l'homme equals Mercurius in a French manuscript, 18th cent, bearing the name Jésus le Juste, who is assigned the significant number 4 in the form of 16 points, Paul 3. This refers to the 4 cherubim in the vision of Ezekiel, each of which had 4 faces. Ezek 1:10-10-14. In unorthodox fashion he is dressed like a woman, as is often the case with the hermaphroditic Mercurius in alchemical illustrations of the 17th and 18th centuries. Models for this figure are the visions of St. John the Divine, Revel 1 and 4, and of Daniel 7:9 ff. Jezoth, Yesod, is the 9th and middle sephira in the lowest triad of the Kabbalistic tree, and was interpreted as the creative and procreative power in the universe. Alchemically, he corresponds to the spiritus vegetativus, Mercurius. Just as Mercurius has a phallic aspect in alchemy, being related to Hermes Kilenios, so in the Zohar has Yesod. Indeed, the Zadok, or just one as Yesod is also called, is the organ of generation. He is the spout of the waters, effusorium aquarum, or the tube, fistula, and water pipe, canalis, and the spring of bubbling water, scaturigo. Such comparisons mislead the modern mind into one-sided interpretations, for instance that Yesod is simply the penis, or conversely that the obviously sexual language has no basis in real sexuality. But in mysticism one must remember that no symbolic object has only one meaning. It is always several things at once. Sexuality does not exclude spirituality, nor spirituality sexuality, for in God all opposites are abolished. One has only to think of the unio mystica of Simeon ben Yochai in Zohar 3, which Shkolem CN 290 barely mentions. Yesod has many meanings, which in the manuscript are related to Mercurius. In alchemy, Mercurius is the ligament of the soul, uniting spirit and body. His dual nature enables him to play the role of mediator. He is bodily and spiritual and is himself the union of these two principles. Correspondingly, in Yesod is accomplished the mystery of the unisho of the upper Tifereth and the lower Malkuth. He is also called the covenant of peace. Similar designations are bread, chief of the faces, i.e. of the upper and lower, the apex which touches earth and heaven, propinquus, the near one, since he is nearer to the glory, Shekinah, i.e. Malkuth, than to Tifereth and the strong one of Israel. Yesod unites the emanation of the right, masculine side, Nazak, life force, with the left, feminine side, Hod, beauty. He is called firm, reliable, constant, because he leads the emanation of Tifereth down into Malkuth. Mercurius is often symbolized as a tree, and Yesod as frutex, tree trunk, and virgultum, thicket. Mercurius is the spiritus vegetativus, spirit of life and growth, and Yesod is described as vivus, living or living for aeons. Just as Mercurius is the prima materia and the basis of the whole process, so Yesod means foundation. In natural things, Yesod contains in himself quicksilver, for this is the basis of the whole art of transmutation. Not, of course, ordinary quicksilver, but that which not without mystery is called a star. From this star flow the waters of the good god El, or quicksilver. This quicksilver is called the spherical water, or the water of baptism. This water is called the daughter of Matred, that is, of a man who labors unweariedly at making gold. For this water flows not out of the earth, nor is it dug out of mines, but is brought forth and perfected with great labor and much diligence. His wife is called the water of gold, or such kind of water as gives rise to gold. And if this workman is espoused with her, he will engender a daughter, who will be the water of the king's bath. On the basis of isopsephic speculation, the water of gold was identified with Yesod. The tablet with 16 signs for gold or sun at the feet of the Fils Delome seems to point to this, pi 3. The Kabbalah Denudata reproduces a kamea, containing not 2 times 8, but 8 times 8 equals 64 numbers, which represent the sum of the name of the golden water. As the prima materia is also called lead and Saturn, we should mention that the Sabbath is coordinated with Yesod, as is the letter Teth, which stands under the influence of Shabtai, Saturn. In the same way that Mercurius, as a volatile substance, is named the bird, goose, chick of Hermes, swan, eagle, vulture, and phoenix, Yesod, as well as Tifereth, is called Pullus Avis, also Penna, Allah, feather, wing. Feathers and wings play a role in alchemy too. The eagle that devours its own feathers or wings, and the feathers of the phoenix in Michael Meyer. The idea of the bird eating its own feathers is a variant of the Ouroboros, which in turn is connected with Leviathan. Leviathan and the great dragon are names for both Yesod and Tifereth. Yesod is as a part to the whole, and the whole is Tifereth, who is named the sun. The feet of the apocalyptic Son of Man, glowing as if in the fire, may have a connection with Malchuth, since the feet are the organ that touches the earth. The earth, Malchuth, is Yesod's footstool. Malkuth is also the furnace, the place destined for the cooking and decoction of the influence sent down to her by her husband for the nourishment of the hosts. After this digression, let us turn back once more to Eliezer's text. The golden head with the silver moon hair and the body made of red earth mingled with fire are the inside of a black, poisonous, ugly figure, which is how the Shulamite now appears. Obviously, these negative qualities are to be understood in a moral sense, although chemically they signify the black lead of the initial state. But inside is the second Adam, a mystic Christ, as is made clear by the allegory of the lion which Samson slew, and which then became the habitation of a swarm of honeybees. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. These words were interpreted as referring to the Corpus Christi, the host, which Eliezer calls the food of heroes. This strange expression and the still stranger conception of the Christ present in the host are an allusion to the alchemical secret. That is why the author can say with Job 28:7 that the way is unknown, neither hath the eye of the vulture beheld it. It is shrouded in mystery, for the stone belongeth only to the proven and elect of God. The lapis also figures in the Kabbalah. Sometimes Adonai, the name of the last Sephira, and Malkuth herself, the kingdom, are so called, for the latter is the foundation of the whole fabric of the world. The stone is, indeed, of supreme importance, because it fulfills the function of Adam Kadmon as the capital stone, from which all the upper and lower hosts in the work of creation are brought into being. It is called the sapphire stone, because it takes on diverse colors from the highest powers, and works in created things now in one wise, now in the contrary, administering at times good, at others evil, now life, now death, now sickness, now healing, now poverty, now riches. The stone appears here as the power of fate. Indeed, as the reference to Deuteronomy 32:39 shows, it is God himself. Noor von Rosenroth was himself an alchemist, and his words here are written with deliberate intent. He emphasizes that the stone is the one which the builders rejected and is become the head of the corner. It occupies a middle position in the Sephiroth system, since it unites in itself the powers of the upper world and distributes them to the lower. According to its position, therefore, it would correspond to Tifereth. I have found no evidence in the alchemical literature that the sapphire was an arcanum before the time of Paracelsus. It seems as though this author introduced it into alchemy from the Kabbalah as a synonym for the arcane substance. For the virtue which lies in the sapphire is given from heaven by way of solution, coagulation, and fixation. Now, since heaven is created so as to work through these three things until it has achieved this, viz., the production of the sapphire and its virtues, so must the breaking up of the sapphire correspond to the same three procedures. This breaking up is such that the bodies vanish and the arcanum remains. For before the sapphire existed, there was no arcanum. But subsequently, just as life was given to man, the arcanum was given to this material by heaven. We can recognize here relationships with Kabbalistic ideas. Paracelsus's pupil, Adam von Bodenstein, says in his Onomasticon, the sapphire material, that liquid in which there is no harmful matter. Dorn relates the sapphirine flower to the arcanum cherry of Paracelsus. The Epistola ad Hermanum cites a certain Hermaphroditus de Galeinen Husio. Then arises the sapphirine flower of the hermaphrodite, the wondrous mystery of the macrocosm, of which one part, if it be poured into 1,000 parts of the melted aphorism, converts it all into its own nature. This passage is influenced by Paracelsus. The lapis sapphirius or saphirinus is derived from Ezekiel 1:22 and 26, where the firmament above the living creature was like a terrible crystal, and a sapphire stone, also 10:1, and from Exodus 24:10, and they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet as it were a work of sapphire stone, and as the heaven when clear. In alchemy, our gold is crystalline. The treasure of the philosophers is a certain glassy heaven like crystal and ductile like gold. The tincture of gold is transparent as crystal, fragile as glass. The Book of the Cave of Treasures says that Adam's body shone like the light of a crystal. The crystal, which appears equally pure within and without, refers in ecclesiastical language to the unimpaired purity of the Virgin. The throne in Ezekiel's vision, says Gregory the Great, is rightly likened to the sapphire, for this stone has the color of air. He compares Christ to the crystal in a way that served as a model for the language and ideas of the alchemists. The combination of water and crystal is found also in the Kabbalistic Sifra de Zeneutha. The paragraph 178 of Luria's commentary says, the second form is called crystalline dew, and this is formed of the severity of the kingdom of the first Adam, which entered into the wisdom of macroprosopis. Hence in the crystal there appears a distinct red color, and this form is the wisdom whereof they said that judgments are rooted in it. Although alchemy was undoubtedly influenced by such comparisons, the stone cannot be traced back to Christ, despite all the analogies. It was the mystical property of alchemy, this stone that is no stone, or the stone that hath a spirit, and is found in the streamings of the Nile. It is a symbol that cannot be explained away as yet another supererogatory attempt to obscure the Christian mystery. On the contrary, it appears as a new and singular product, which in early times gradually crystallized out through the assimilation of Christian ideas into Gnostic material. Later, clear attempts were made in turn to assimilate the alchemical ideas to the Christian, though, as Eliezer's text shows, there was an unbridgeable difference between them. The reason for this is that the symbol of the stone, despite the analogy with Christ, contains an element that cannot be reconciled with the purely spiritual assumptions of Christianity. The very concept of the stone indicates the peculiar nature of this symbol. Stone is the essence of everything solid and earthly. It represents feminine matter, and this concept intrudes into the sphere of spirit and its symbolism. The Church's hermeneutic allegories of the cornerstone and the stone cut out of a mountain without hands, which were interpreted as Christ, were not the source of the lapis symbol, but were used by the alchemists in order to justify it, for it was not of Christian origin. The stone was more than an incarnation of God. It was a concretization, a materialization that reached down into the darkness of the inorganic realm, or even arose from it, from that part of the deity which put itself in opposition to the Creator because, as the Basilidians say, it remained latent in the panspermia, universal seedbed, as the formative principle of crystals, metals, and living organisms. The inorganic realm included regions, like that of hellfire, which were the dominion of the devil. The three-headed mercurial serpent was, indeed, a triunity in matter, the lower triad, complementing the divine trinity. We may therefore suppose that in alchemy, an attempt was made at a symbolical integration of evil by localizing the divine drama of redemption in man himself. This process appears now as an extension of redemption beyond man to matter, now as an ascent of the spirit of imitation, or Lucifer, and as a reconciliation of this with the spirit descending from above, both the above and below undergoing a process of mutual transformation. It seems to me that Eliezer's text conveys some idea of this, as the transformation of the black Shulamite takes place in 3 stages, which were mentioned by Dionysius the Areopagite as characterizing the mystical ascent: emendatio, purification; illuminatio, perfectio. Dionysius refers the purification to Psalm 51:7, "Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow," and the illumination to Psalm 13:3, "Lighten mine eyes." The 2 heavenly luminaries, sun and moon, correspond on the old view to the 2 eyes. The perfection he refers to, Matthew 5:48, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Here we have one aspect of the approximation to divinity. The other aspect is exemplified by the image of the apocalyptic Son of Man, described earlier. The transformation of the Shulamite, as described in the text, can thus be conceived as the preliminary stage of an individuation process, rising unexpectedly out of the unconscious in symbolical form, and comparable to a dream that seeks to outline this process, and for that purpose makes use now of religious and now of scientific images. So regarded and looked at from a psychological angle, the following facts emerge. The nigredo corresponds to the darkness of the unconscious, which contains in the first place the inferior personality, the shadow. This changes into the feminine figure that stands immediately behind it, as it were, and controls it, the anima, whose typical representative the Shulamite is. "I am black, but comely, not hateful," as Eleazar would have us believe after having reconsidered the matter. For since nature was deformed by the sin of Adam, her blackness must in his view be regarded as ugliness, as the blackness of sin, as the saturnine initial state, heavy and black as lead. But the Shulamite, the priestess of Ishtar, signifies earth, nature, fertility, everything that flourishes under the damp light of the moon, and also the natural life urge. The anima is indeed the archetype of life itself, which is beyond all meaning and all moral categories. What at first struck us as incomprehensible, namely that the old Adam should come forth from her again, thus reversing the sequence of creation, can now be understood, for if anyone knows how to live the natural life, it is the old Adam. Here he is not so much the old Adam as an Adam reborn from a daughter of Eve, an Adam restored to his pristine naturalness. The fact that she gives rebirth to Adam, and that a black Shulamite produces the original man in his savage, unredeemed state, rules out the suspicion that the old Adam is a slip of the pen or a misprint. There is a method in it, which allows us to guess what it was that induced the author to adopt a Jewish pseudonym. For the Jew was the handiest example, living under everyone's eyes, of a non-Christian, and therefore a vessel for all those things a Christian could not or did not like to remember. So it was really very natural to put those dark, half-conscious thoughts which began with the movement of the free spirit, the late Christian religion of the Holy Ghost, and which formed the lifeblood of the Renaissance, into the mouth of an allegedly Jewish author. Just as the era of the Old Testament prophets began with Hosea, who was commanded by God to marry another Shulamite, so the course d'amour of René d'Anjou, the Minnesingers and saints with their passionate love of God, were contemporaneous with the brethren of the free spirit. Eleazar's text is nothing but a late echo of these centuries-old events which changed the face of Christianity. But in any such echo, there is also a premonition of future developments. In the very same century, the author of Faust, that momentous opus, was born. The Shulamite remains unchanged, as did the old Adam, and yet Adam Kadmon is born, a non-Christian second Adam, just at the moment when the transformation is expected. This extraordinary contradiction seems insoluble at first sight, but it becomes understandable when we consider that the illumination or solificatio of the Shulamite is not the first transformation, but the second, and takes place within. The subject of transformation is not the empirical man, however much he may identify with the old Adam, but Adam the primordial man, the archetype within us. The black Shulamite herself represents the first transformation. It is the coming to consciousness of the black anima, the primordial man's feminine aspect. The second, or solificatio, is the conscious differentiation of the masculine aspect, a far more difficult task. Every man feels identical with this, though in reality he is not. There is too much blackness in the archetype for him to put it all down to his own account, and so many good and positive things that he cannot resist the temptation to identify with them. It is therefore much easier to see the blackness in projected form. The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat, holds true even of the most enlightened psychology. But the masculine aspect is as unfathomable as the feminine aspect. It would certainly not be fitting for the empirical man, no matter how swollen his ego feelings, to appropriate the whole range of Adam's heights and depths. Human being though he is, he has no cause to attribute to himself all the nobility and beauty a man can attain to, just as he would assuredly refuse to accept the guilt for the abjectness and baseness that make man lower than an animal. Unless, of course, he were driven by insanity to act out the role of the archetype. But although when the masculine aspect of the primordial man comes forth again, it is the old Adam, who is black like the Shulamite, it is nevertheless the second Adam, i.e. the still older Adam before the fall, Adam Kadmon. The ambiguity of this passage is too perfect for the author, who proves himself elsewhere to be a not particularly skillful forger, to have been conscious of it. The coming to consciousness of Adam Kadmon would indeed be a great illumination, for it would be a realization of the inner man, or anthropos, an archetypal totality transcending the sexes. Insofar as this man is divine, we could speak of a theophany. The Shulamite's hope of becoming a white dove points to a future, perfect state. The white dove is a hint that the Shulamite will become Sophia, the Holy Ghost, while Adam Kadmon is an obvious parallel of Christ. If the alchemical process of thought corresponded only to the three stages of purification, illumination, perfection, it would be difficult to see the justification for paraphrasing the analogous Christian ideas which are so patently betrayed, for instance in the fixing to the black cross. But the need for a symbolism other than the Christian one is evident from the fact that the transformation process does not culminate in the second Adam and the white dove, but in the lapis, which with God's help is made by the empirical man. It is a half-physical, half-metaphysical product, a psychological symbol expressing something created by man and yet supraordinate to him. This paradox can only be something like the symbol of the self, which likewise can be brought forth, i.e. made conscious, by human effort, but is at the same time by definition a pre-existent totality that includes the conscious and the unconscious. This is a thought that goes beyond the Christian world of ideas and involves a mystery consummated in and through man. It is as though the drama of Christ's life were, from now on, located in man as its living carrier. As a result of this shift, the events formulated in dogma are brought within range of psychological experience and become recognizable in the process of individuation. It is naturally not the task of an empirical science to evaluate such spiritual developments from the standpoint of transcendental truth. It must content itself with establishing the existence of these processes and comparing them with parallel observations in modern man. It also has the right to attempt to map out the logical structure of such psychologisms. The fact that it must push forward into regions where belief and doubt argue the question of truth does not prove that it has any intention of intervening or presuming to decide what the truth is. Its truth consists solely in establishing the facts and in explaining them without prejudice within the framework of empirical psychology. Under no circumstances is it entitled to say whether the facts are valid or not, or to try to ascertain their moral or religious value. I must emphasize this so emphatically because my method is constantly suspected of being theology or metaphysics in disguise. The difficulty for my critics seems to be that they are unable to accept the concept of psychic reality. A psychic process is something that really exists, and a psychic content is as real as a plant or an animal. In spite of the fact that the duck-billed platypus, for example, cannot be logically derived from the general premises of zoology, it nevertheless indubitably exists, improbable as this may appear to prejudiced minds. It is not a fantasy, and not just somebody's opinion, but an immovable fact. It is perfectly true that one can play metaphysics with psychic facts, and particularly with ideas that have always been counted as metaphysical. But the ideas themselves are not metaphysical. They are empirically verifiable phenomena that are the proper subject of the scientific method. With the statements of the Kabbalah, which as we have seen found their way into alchemy, our interpretation of Adam attains a scope and a depth that can hardly be surpassed. This interpretation includes Eve as the feminine principle itself. She appears chiefly as the lower, as Malchuth, kingdom, Shekinah, the indwelling of God, or as Atara, crown, the equivalent below of Kether, the upper crown. She is also present in the hermaphroditic Sephiroth system, the right half of which is masculine and the left half feminine. Hence Adam Kadmon, as a personification of the whole inverted tree, is androgynous, but the system itself is a highly differentiated coniunctio symbol, and as such, divided into 3 parts, 3 columns of 3 Sephiroth each. According to Hippolytus, the Nassenes divided the hermaphroditic Adam into 3 parts, just as they did Geryon. Geryon was triple-bodied and the possessor of the splendid cattle on the island of Erythia. Heracles slew him with an arrow, on which occasion Hera was wounded in the breast. On the same journey, Heracles had threatened to shoot the sun because his rays were too hot. So the slaying of Geryon was the last in a series of 3 sacrileges. For they say of this Geryon, continues Hippolytus, that 1 part is spiritual, 1 psychic, and 1 earthly, and they hold that the knowledge of him is the beginning of the capacity to know God. For they say, the beginning of wholeness is the knowledge of man, but the knowledge of God is perfect wholeness. All this, they say, the spiritual, the psychic, and the earthly, set itself in motion and came down together into one man, Jesus, who was born of Mary. And there spoke through it, the spiritual, the psychic, and the earthly, these 3 men, i.e., the triple-bodied Geryon, each from his own substance to his own. For of all things there are 3 kinds, the angelic, the psychic, and the earthly, and 3 churches, angelic, psychic, and earthly, and their names are the chosen, the called, and the captive. This conception bears a striking resemblance to the Sephiroth system. In particular, Geryon corresponds to the cosmogonic Adam Kadmon. He is the masculo-feminine man in all things, whom the Greeks call the heavenly horn of the moon. For they say all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made. That which was made in him is life. This, they say, is life, the unutterable generation of perfect men, which to earlier generations was unknown.